Hey heroes, welcome to another adventurous episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. This week we begin our story eons ago with an ancient alien race called the Nuwali. Highly advanced, this species lived in the distant Lenra galaxy, which is so far from Earth as to be undetectable by modern human technology. However, they did catch the attention of another race. Omega beings so ancient and powerful that they predate the current incarnation of the multiverse and several before it. Because they generally reside in the wild space beyond the known cosmos, they are most often referred to as Beyonders. We've talked about their origins on the channel before, so refer to my video on Captain Universe for more details. The important thing for today is that the Beyonders are known to perform experiments that study the nature of reality and its inhabitants. Approximately 250 million years ago, they contacted the Nuwali through an artifact called a radical cube. If that sounds familiar, it's because such devices can also be used to access the antimatter universe known as the negative zone. Or more specifically, the four-dimensional subspace that allows positively charged matter to enter the negative zone and vice versa without being annihilated. In any event, the radical cube used by the Nuwali was evidently gifted to them by the Beyonders, although they never actually met one in person. Interested in studying the process of evolution, the Beyonders hired the Nuwali to construct a number of special wildlife preserves throughout the universe, paying them in gold. Several of these were apparently established on various planets, but of course today we're concerning ourselves with the one on Earth. Beginning construction sometime in the Triassic period, the Nuwali created a protected tropical area surrounded by a ring of volcanoes and populated by several dinosaur species. Throughout the Mesozoic era, as life on Earth continued to evolve and change, the Nuwali added more species of flora and fauna to their preserve. Of course, there was then an extinction-level event caused by an enormous asteroid that struck the Earth about 66 million years ago. While most dinosaurs across the planet were wiped out, the inhabitants of the Nuwali Preserve were kept safe from the changes to the outside world. At the same time as the surface of the Earth continued to shift, the landmass on which the preserve stood became the frozen continent of Antarctica. However, the Nuwali used their advanced technology to maintain the preserve's tropical climate and keep the ring of volcanoes encircling it dormant. Obscured by ice and cloud, this area became a hidden jungle in the middle of the Antarctic that was eventually dubbed the Savage Land. During the Cenozoic era, they added various mammal species like mammoths and mastodons, as well as the Smilodon, commonly referred to as the saber-toothed tiger. They even took in an offshoot of humanity's ancestors, colloquially known as Man-Apes. Thus, the wildlife preserve essentially became an ecosystem unto itself, populated by various species of flora and fauna that otherwise would have been separated by millions of years of evolution. The Nuwali stayed on the planet until roughly 200,000 BCE when, without warning, the Beyonders suddenly ceased contact as well as payment. Abandoned by their benefactors, the Nuwali came to believe that the reason they were hired to act as intermediaries in the first place was that adrenaline, a hormone produced by many animals on Earth but not the Nuwali themselves, was toxic to the Beyonders. Seeing no reason to continue their work, the Nuwali abandoned the Savage Land to return to their home galaxy. Seeking revenge on the Beyonders, they left behind an intradimensional transporter, disguising it as a fossil that was later dubbed the Motika Bone. Many who touched it were transported to the planet Tomriv in the Lenra galaxy, where the Nuwali would capture them and extract their adrenaline. Of course, this supposed weakness was almost certainly a fabrication, and even if it wasn't, the Beyonders were immensely powerful entities who resided outside of the multiverse itself, and so suffice it to say that the Nuwali's goal of revenge would remain forever out of reach. The Beyonders, meanwhile, used what they learned about the evolutionary process to engineer a new humanoid alien race on the planet Fortisk. These Fortisquians then spread out across the universe, colonizing various star systems, while the Beyonders used them to observe the progress of other sentient races. While the Savage Land was abandoned by its creators, over the centuries it would be discovered and visited by other intelligent beings. For example, at some point in prehistoric times, the godlike relatives of humanity, known as the Eternals, built a temple complex there that was eventually co-opted by others after they left it behind. But of course, while the Savage Land remained isolated, mankind was spreading across the rest of the planet. By the year 19,000 BCE, humanity had established an advanced civilization on the island continent of Atlantis, which grew into a sizable empire. Around 500 years after that, Atlantean explorers discovered the Savage Land as well as the Nuwali technology that maintained its climate. Fascinated by the ancient creatures that dwelt there, the Atlanteans exported several dinosaur species that were then domesticated across their empire. They also brought some unusual animals into the hidden jungle, like griffins and unicorns. Although even in the Savage Land, fabled creatures like these would remain noticeably rare. After studying the Nuwali machines, Atlantean scientists learned how to duplicate and even improve their technology, using it to extend the environmental effects to more of Antarctica's surface. Dubbed Pangea, this new area was originally simply a remote outpost, but grew to become a center of commerce and recreation, with wildlife exhibits, concession stands, and a sizable amusement park. They even constructed a terrifying thrill ride based on their understanding of hell. This included animatronic representations of Charon and Cerberus, who were later depicted in Greek mythology. While Atlantean citizens enjoyed these amusements, the scientists of Pangea began experimenting on the primitive Man-Apes. Turning their attention towards genetic engineering, they altered the DNA of many captive Man-Apes, transforming them into animal-like hybrids. Sometimes referred to as beast people, these genetically engineered humanoids were put to work as laborers in the Atlantean amusement park Pangea Land. However, as time rolled on, the Atlantean citizens began to resent the animal people for their inhuman abilities. Furthermore, because the animal people did not speak at the time, most Atlanteans assumed that they were unintelligent. This led to more oppression and abuse of the beast people, who in turn became increasingly frustrated with their place in society. Eventually, after over 100 years of servitude, a golden-feathered bird man named Tilbrock rose up and became a spiritual leader for the beast people. Tilbrock called for unity and prayer, but one day he came upon a young monkey girl being attacked by a gang of humans. Rushing to her aid, the teary-eyed birdman scooped the small girl up into his arms and fixed his gaze on the crowd. Soon he learned that the reason the child had been assaulted was because she refused to kiss a drunken Atlantean man. In a blind rage, Tilbrock struck at the boorish man, but this act of righteous fury caused the gathering crowd to turn against him. Other animal men witnessed this, but were too terrified to intervene, as the one they admired was beaten to death. Regardless, this incident inspired those in charge of Pangea to expedite their plans to eliminate the need for laborers entirely. Soon, the park was fully automated with robots that were overseen and maintained by a mechanical caretaker named Mother. Unfortunately, this would not mean freedom for the animal people, as they were locked away until their fate could be decided. During this imprisonment, a golden apparition appeared before them and declared that the time to rise up and revolt had come. Inspired by the ghost of Tilbrock, the Beast People broke free and rebelled against their creators in a conflict now known as the First Pangean War. Despite being outnumbered by their oppressors, the animal men eventually declared victory, demanding only to be treated fairly. Finally accepting the error of their ways, the remorseful Atlanteans acquiesced and used their technology to expand the tropical region of Pangea even further, giving the remaining animal people ample territory to colonize and populate. Over the following generations, similarly mutated individuals banded together to form their own tribes, resulting in the emergence of several distinct animal races. The winged bird people inhabited part of a territory called Shallan and became known as the Aryans. On the eastern side of Shallan, monkey people built the village of Botor in the forest canopy, thus becoming the Tree People. The aquatic fish people took to the Gorhan River and became known as the Tubanti, but have also been referred to as Manphibians. It should be noted that there are many other animalistic denizens of the Savage Land, like the pterodactyl-like Terrans, who may or may not be descended from Atlantean-created animal men. Some, like the subterranean bat things, are semi-humanoid in appearance, but lack the intelligence and civility of other potential beast people descendants. In any event, the recreational area of Pangea was eventually shut down, and any remaining Atlanteans returned to the subterranean caverns containing the Nuwali machines. Meanwhile, Atlantis was not the only notable empire on Earth at the time. There was also the Kingdom of Lemuria, which was ruled by a monstrous race called the Deviants, who had enslaved much of mankind. It's been theorized that a number of these human slaves escaped from Lemuria and also made their way to Pangea. As the Deviants attempted to claim complete global domination, they also clashed with the Kingdom of Atlantis, which became the last bastion for humanity. Then, around the year 18,000 BCE, an Atlantean scientist named Garokk determined that the fall of Atlantis was imminent. Unwilling to entertain such thought, the Atlantean king Kamu sent Garokk to Pangea, which by this point was considered the most remote outpost in the empire. There, Garokk began working with the Atlantean robot Mother to develop a cryogenic hibernation chamber. While he was testing the prototype, the Earth was visited by the ancient space gods known as Celestials for the second time. We've talked about the Celestials on the channel before, but suffice it to say they are very old, very powerful, and responsible for the creation of the Eternals, the Deviants, and even the Beyonders. In a supreme act of arrogance, the Deviants believed that they had surpassed their creators and fired upon the celestial vessel. In response, the space gods passed their judgment on the Deviants, wiping out their entire empire with a single attack. The resulting devastation spread across the planet, causing a global flood that sank both Atlantis and Lemuria to the bottom of the ocean. This Great Cataclysm, as it was called, also caused Pangea and the Savage Land to sink below sea level, but the mountain range surrounding the area stood strong, protecting the prehistoric animals from the torrential flood. Naturally, some ocean water did seep through the cracks, forming what is now known as the Lost Lake. The human population of the hidden jungle fared less well, and roughly 3/4 of the people still living there lost their lives in the upheaval. Many of those who remained soon fell into barbarism in a mad scramble to survive, and the ensuing violence claimed even more lives. When the proverbial dust settled, the human population of the Savage Land was reduced to a mere 10% of its pre-cataclysmic levels. In the aftermath, as peace slowly returned, the remaining survivors formed a number of tribes and communities. A small minority kept the memory of their Atlantean heritage alive, building advanced cities like Lemura and Silanda. It's been theorized that the denizens of Lemura are the descendants of human refugees from deviant Lemuria, as they have perhaps erroneously been referred to as Lemurians on occasion. In any event, the upheaval caused by the Great Cataclysm also damaged the Nuwali machines that kept the savage land warm. As a result, the ice slowly began to creep across the jungle, threatening the creatures who lived there. In the face of this, some denizens of the savage land turned their hopes to prayer and begged their high priest to save them. Fortunately, the Beyonders took notice of the issue and dispatched a group of Fortisquian colonists from Arcturus IV to investigate. The exact timeline of events is unclear, but the Fortisquians supposedly crashed their comet ship on Earth sometime around 8000 BCE at the latest. 3 of the survivors, Kamar, Ular, and Zolthar, completed their mission, repairing the Nuwali devices and saving the savage land. Among the alien technology, they also found a teleportation warp that allowed them to return home, only to find Arcturus IV in ruins from some unspecified incident. Returning to Earth, the 3 decided to become humanity's caretakers and passed on rudimentary knowledge to the savage land's more primitive tribes. The caretakers then left the Antarctic to travel the world, performing a number of experiments involving both science and magic, one of which resulted in the creation of the first modern werewolf. Meanwhile, some of the savage land's denizens attributed the returning heat to their sun god Garokk, whose worship dated back to pre-cataclysmic Atlantis. Following this, every 1,000 years a descendant of the High Priest would take the title of Red Wizard and offer 1 man and 1 woman as a pair of willing human sacrifices to the sun god. The group who maintained this tradition and continued the worship of Garokk became known as the Sun People. Of course, a number of other tribes across the savage land developed their own cultures and traditions. The Fall People, for example, were a society of hunter-gatherers who often cut their hair into mohawks and in some ways resembled Native Americans. Another hunter-gatherer tribe was the Zebra People, whose racially integrated society welcomed all people regardless of skin tone. As a matter of tradition, each individual member of the tribe painted their bodies with stripes of the opposite color. As a result, each man and woman was both black and white, symbolizing their unity as one people. While they are sometimes called the Swamp Tribe, the Zebra People should not be confused with the much more savage and hostile Swamp Men. There are technically multiple Swamp Men tribes who vary in appearance, with some more animalistic than others. In general, the various factions of Swamp Men are territorial and often in conflict with neighboring cultures. At some point in the distant past, the Swamp Men encountered members of the alien Sagittarian race, who they referred to as God-Men from the skies. Working on behalf of an entity called the Galaxy Master, the Sagittarians stored a planet-destroying weapon in a nearby cave, warning that it should not be tampered with. Before departing, the aliens also left behind a giant robot guardian called Umbu the Unliving, which many of the Swamp Men worshipped across subsequent generations. Another extraterrestrial encounter happened around 3000 BCE when a pair of humanoid aliens named Lelania and Daemon visited the Savage Land. The 2 lovers sought only peace and tranquility, but tragedy struck when they were attacked by a rampaging dinosaur. Lelania was trampled to death, and in his grief, Daemon caused a torrent of rain that flooded the land for 40 days. He spent his power doing this and fell into a deep slumber, after which his story was passed down as legend among the Fall People. Meanwhile, the Fortisquian Caretakers occasionally popped up throughout history, facilitating the creation of several superhumans. They granted considerable psychic power to an unidentified warlock who would go on to impersonate the wizard Merlin and use a number of aliases like Mahayogi and Merlin Demonspawn. The Caretakers also helped empower the Egyptian mutant Anath-Na-Mut, later known as the Sphinx, circa 1300 BC. However, none of their creations remained under their control, most either escaping or turning against them. Then, sometime around the year 1000 AD, the Caretakers encountered an itinerant European sorcerer named Ebrock, who was attempting to evolve regular house cats into a humanoid form. The Caretakers aided Ebrock in this experiment, resulting in the creation of the race known as Cat People. I will note that there's also a human tribe in the Savage Land called the Cat People, but they are totally unrelated. The Savage Land Cat People are named thus because they both revere and regularly hunt saber-tooths and other large cats. They sacrifice the captured animals upon a ritualistic altar before drinking their blood and using their bones, teeth, and pelts for clothing. The cat people created by Ebrock and the Caretakers, conversely, were anthropomorphic felines with human-like intellect. Pleased by what he'd accomplished, Ebrock presented his creations to fellow mystics Oran, Yanthon, and the Italian alchemist Belasco. Each of these men was given a cat person to act as a servant, but soon they found that this new race was reproducing quickly. They also reached maturity much faster than humans, and after a few generations the cat people revolted. Ebrock did not want to kill his creations, but at the urging of Oran and the others, performed a ritual that banished them to a realm called the Land Within. However, in exchange for sparing their lives, one of the wizards, likely Belasco, deemed that each generation one cat person would be dubbed the Balcatar, meaning the Summoned. As the name implies, the one bearing this title could be called to Earth, where they would be bound to serve the one who summoned them. Belasco went on to practice the darker side of the mystic arts, making contact with a group of beings called the Mabdara, who he believed to be elder gods. In truth, the ones he communed with were ruling members of a demonic race called the Nagarai, who were created by a true elder god, Cathan. Belasco agreed to serve the Nagarai in exchange for immortality, and was transformed by them, growing more demonic in appearance. In the year 1289, he was convicted of heresy and sentenced to be burned at the stake, but was freed by the Balcatar and other sorceress familiars. He then abducted a woman named Beatrice Potinari, forced her into a bigamous marriage, and impregnated her with his demonic progeny. Belasco then fled to the Antarctic with his illegal bride, where he took refuge in the underground remains of the hellish Atlantean thrill ride. He was pursued by the Florentine poet Dante Alighieri, who also cared for Beatrice. But by the time he tracked them to the 9th level of the Atlantean replica of Hell, it was too late to save the woman, who perished before his very eyes while demonic children ripped themselves from her womb. Dante attacked Belasco in a mad fury, but all seemed lost when he grew tired and the sinister alchemist disarmed him. But as luck would have it, as Belasco swung his sword once more, he inadvertently cut a pipe above him. His body was covered in a potent Atlantean coolant, leaving his immortal form trapped in ice for several centuries. Dante, meanwhile, escaped back to Florence, where he was inspired by what he saw and experienced to write the narrative poem Divine Comedy. Now, Belasco did eventually thaw out and continue his service to the Nagarai, but for what happened next with him, you can check out my video on Ilyana Rasputina, aka Magic. In the meantime, there are some other examples of people discovering the Savage Land in subsequent centuries. Roughly 500 years ago, give or take a few decades, a British vessel struck an iceberg and sank while seeking passage through the Antarctic Ocean. A surviving seaman was swept away and washed up in the Savage Land's hidden jungle. Wandering into the territory of the Sun People, he came upon an altar with a statue depicting the sun god Garokk. Finding a cup of water on the altar, the parched sailor drank deep, little realizing that the peculiar liquid came from a fiery underground pool with mysterious properties. At that moment, however, the Sun People appeared and attacked the frightened sailor. He fled into the jungle, and as survival instinct took over, the man apparently blacked out. When he awakened, he had somehow escaped from the hidden jungle, after which he was rescued and found passage back to England. Then, as the decades passed and the people around him grew old and died, the sailor seemed not to age normally. Instead, his skin eventually turned a pallid gray, and his body hardened into a stone-like substance. Resembling the statue of the sun god, the now former sailor became known as Garokk the Petrified Man. During these centuries, mankind made further exploration of the Antarctic, but for the most part the hidden jungle remained hidden. However, there are examples of dinosaurs being encountered after they wandered beyond the border of the savage land and became frozen in the polar wasteland. In any event, the man most often credited with the discovery of the hidden jungle was a British lord named Robert Plunder. But we'll dive into that story at a later date when we revisit one of the first topics we ever covered on the channel, and once again discuss the Lord of the Hidden Jungle, Ka-Zar. In the meantime, that is all I have for you this week, and thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members, all of which help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you can get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. Let me also give a very, very big thank you to you guys for helping me get to 100,000 subscribers. It really means a lot to me. But that is indeed all I have for you this week. Until next time, true believers, Excelsior!